At the end of Deltarune's Chapter 1, we see Kris rep out their soul, grab a knife, and then eat some pie. Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's anything sinister going on, or so we thought, until Chapter 2 came out. That's when, against Kris's will, we take control and emotionally destroy Noelle, forcing her to eliminate every inhabitant of the cyber world and frees her best friend, Birdly. Then, in Chapter 4, by following the weird route, we completely break her in a chilling scene that feels straight out of an analog horror game. Afterward, Kris kicks the soul around the bathroom in a fit of rage, which makes us wonder, why don't they just get rid of it? Well, it all seems to be part of a plan that leads us to the game's ending, connecting directly to the Roaring Night, the Snowgrave route, and above all, the control that the soul exerts over Kris, and even over the game's narrative itself, which leads us to analyze, before anything else, the game itself. Since the end of Chapter 1, Deltarune has presented us with one of its biggest mysteries. We see Kris rip out their soul for the first time, locking it in a cage so it can't escape. By the way, from here on out, I'll be referring to the soul as us, or the player, since that's what it represents. It also saves me from repeating the same word over and over. Getting back on topic, we can barely even move inside the cage during the cutscene. Then, Kris pulls out a knife and looks directly at us, implying they're about to do something terrible. And even though Chapter 2 clarifies the knife was just for eating Toriel's pie, the message was clear. To Kris, the soul is nothing but a nuisance. We see something similar at the end of Chapter 2, when Kris rips the soul out in the bathroom and jumps out the window, only to put it back in minutes later after slashing Toriel's tires. And later in Chapter 4, if we follow the weird route and give Noelle the ring, Kris furiously throws us into a trash can and kicks us relentlessly until Asgard interrupts them. So all of this leads to one conclusion. Kris hates us, and not just a little. A lot. In fact, it's become a meme since Chapter 4 that poor Kris is on the verge of snapping. And we can't blame them. We literally made their friend almost die of fright. But despite all this, they always put the player's soul back into their body, which inevitably makes us ask, if they hate us so much, why don't they get rid of us, the soul, for good? This question is the foundation of this video, because not only does it define Kris and their intentions, but it also reveals that the soul is ultimately the centerpiece and the final secret to Deltarune's ending. It's a topic we'll explore in much greater depth in a future video, but one we can't ignore if we want to understand why Kris hasn't gotten rid of it. So, what is the soul? According to Ralsei in Chapter 1, the tutorial, the soul is the very culmination of one's being, containing the will, the compassion, and the fate of the world. And let's remember, Ralsei isn't some ignorant character. He understands perfectly how combat works, how dark worlds are born, and of course, the prophecy. So let's have a little faith in what this fluffy boy has to say. The soul's power is undeniable. Throughout the adventure, it has special interactions, like changing color and function in fights like the one against Spamton. But it's in Chapter 4 where its capabilities expand dramatically. It gains the ability to glow, a new mechanic that lets it transform small dark enemies into TP, the resource for spells. But we also get the ability to banish, where the soul emits a strong light that purifies more powerful darkness. If we look at the final battle of this chapter, the soul has the ability to unleash the Titan's weak point. And not only that, when Gerson joins the fight, the soul glows over him and Susie to give them a power boost. And last but not least, its primary function, the soul has the power to seal both the Dark Fountains and the Titans, as demonstrated at the end of every chapter. It also emits a powerful glow that dispels all darkness. So all things considered, its main role so far has been to keep the darkness at bay. And this is what makes its relationship with Kris so weird. And that brings us directly to the relationship between Kris and the soul. In Chapter 4, inside Dessa's room, Kris rips out the soul and puts it in a small gift box after we discover a code on Dessa's guitar. A code they don't want us to see. This shows us they're planning something they want to keep hidden from us. After that, we're able to move freely through the house's vents, while the distance between two plays. This track uses Dessa's theme as a leitmotif, but the notes are much more spread out than in findher.og. This makes the title not only literal, since we've been separated from Kris, but also representative of the unbridgeable gap between Kris and the soul, even when it's inside them. Kris carries a player's soul, but their goals are so different that it just makes them feel empty and miserable. This is highlighted even more intensely on the weird route, where against Kris's will, like when they state their own preference but we ignore it, we emotionally break Noelle. We know Kris wants to protect her, They even sneak away without the soul just to tell her everything is okay, but we'll get more into that in a moment. The thing is, while we're wandering through the holiday house, we find them in the kitchen. If we try to interact with them, they'll throw a bottle to trap us, all while slowly and creepily turning their head towards a camera, as if they know we're there. If instead we go into Des's room and try to interact with the guitar again, this time they'll launch a hockey puck at us from under the bed. Susie and Noelle hear the noise, and while they have a moment together, we're stuck dodging Kris's attacks inside a closet. And since we're in the holiday house, we can't forget the heart-shaped pillows Carol collects. As if that wasn't suspicious enough, Noelle tells us that when they were little, Kris used to pretend to rip out their soul with one of those pillows to chase her around. This is most likely just a bit of foreshadowing, but it's still curious to think that even as a child, Kris had this idea of ripping out their soul. I highly doubt, however, it's the same soul we see in the game, mainly because all signs point to Kris only acquiring it once we started playing in Chapter 1, when we were inserted into their body instead of the vessel. Now, this whole theme reaches its boiling point in the Snowgrave route. After what we did to Noelle in Chapter 2, she tells us that the day before she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw snow and was terrified. Then Kris came up to her and said everything that happened in the cyber world was a prank, that Burley was going to be okay, and they apologized for acting weird at the hospital. This shows us that Kris, acting on their own, spoke to Noelle without us even knowing. Furthermore, she clarifies that she heard Kris's voice, not the voice from her dream, the same dream voice that forced her to freeze Burley. In other words, our voice, the soul's. Breaking this down, we can see that Kris is actively trying to repair the damage we caused, confirming they had absolutely no control over what happened. When Noelle asks if she can talk more about yesterday, we can answer, please don't dit, or proceed. Refusing will make Noelle put the whole thing behind her, relieved that Kris is back to normal, thus aborting the weird route. However, if we decide to continue and force Noelle to re-equip the Thorn Ring, a peculiar animation plays, a red crystal shattering like a mirror, where you can even spot a small heart among the cracks. This whole scene implies that we are injecting a form of control into Noelle, turning her into our future puppet, just like we control Kris. And moreover, in that same sequence, when Noelle asks who's going to hear, and we respond, me, the environment turns macabre and Kris's entire aura changes. Noelle then confirms that this is the same voice she heard in her dream, and not only that, the phone call Kris receives at the end of the Snowgrave continuation is from Carol, telling them that Noelle is very much looking forward to seeing them tomorrow. This means, once again, that we are gaining control over another character besides Kris, and that is the key to this theory. It helps us understand why the soul is so important to the prophecy, and why Kris hasn't gotten rid of it. And in fact, in the very next scene, the one in the bathroom, Kris lets it all out, kicking us around, angrier than we've ever seen them. They hate us, and yet they put the soul back in. But why? The answer lies with the Roaring Knight, with Carol. So if you haven't seen my video on the Knight's identity, I highly recommend checking it out. You won't regret it, and it'll help you understand what's coming next. Both the Knight and Kris have the ability to create dark fountains. It's important to differentiate which worlds were created by whom. The ones in chapters 1, 2, and 4 were the Knight's doing, while the one in chapter 3 was created by Kris. In this same chapter, the Knight tries to abduct Toriel, and upon failing, takes Undyne to the bunker instead. A bunker with a keypad bearing symbols that allude to a pine tree, the holidays, a police badge, Undyne, and a Deltarune, possibly Toriel. The Knight is executing a plan, and Kris seems to be their accomplice. During their fight, Kris coughs, and the Knight hesitates. Additionally, Kris receives calls from a strange voice, which the Snowgrave route reveals to be Carol. And speaking of Carol, she behaves very strangely. She welcomes Kris with open arms and seems to know about our existence. And when I say our, I mean us, the soul. Call me crazy, but when we leave her house, Carol puts a hand on our shoulder and says, "My apologies about what just happened, Kris." Then, in red text, she adds, "As you know, you are welcome here anytime." She's speaking directly to the player, to the soul. All these clues suggest that Carol could be the Roaring Knight, or at the very least, is actively collaborating with them and with Kris. So what does this all have to do with Kris keeping the soul? The deal is this: Carol / the Knight and Kris create the Dark Fountains to advance their plan, likely to find us. and Kris, using our soul, seals them to prevent the roaring. This is why Kris doesn't get rid of us. They need us to prevent the apocalypse. While at the same time, the plan to find Des moves forward. But that's just the first reason. Things get much deeper if we remember what Rosse said. The soul is the culmination of one's being. Without it, a body is just an empty vessel, like the one we created at the beginning. It's highly likely that Kris needs a soul to live, to feel, to function. Their brief escapes are like holding their breath underwater. Sure, desperate acts to regain a sliver of control, but in the end, they always have to come up for air. They always have to come back to us. And this is where the third reason comes in, the soul's control, which is why Kris can't get rid of us. The weird route is the ultimate proof. By forcing Noelle to become a weapon, the soul reveals itself to the knight that its power goes far beyond simply sealing fountains. It reveals itself as an entity capable of bending wills and creating living weapons. Suddenly, the soul goes from being a useful key to an indispensable strategical asset. But for me, and this might sound strange for a Deltarune theory, the most important reason is the narrative. What would be the point if Kris could just use the soul at will, with no consequences? Without the soul's control, the story would be simple. Kris and the knight have a plan, they execute it, use the soul's power to clean up, and they find Des. The protagonist would have no development, no meaningful suffering. The game would be much more boring because the story would lack any clear conflict. With the soul's control, however, the story becomes a psychological thriller. Kris is trapped in a forced alliance to achieve a greater good, all while trying to protect their loved ones from that same ally. With that cleared up, we have to ask, why is Kris so interested in finding Des? The answer has been right in front of us the whole time. Des used to spend time with Kris when they were kids, along with Azriel and Noel. Noel is the only friend Kris has left from when they were free, and when Kris snuck out to talk to her, they promised to protect her. If they're willing to protect her from us with that kind of determination, we can only imagine that everything they're doing with the knight is to find their other best friend, Des. However, there's a theory circulating that it's Carol Holiday who's manipulating Kris, even being willing to sacrifice Noel to achieve her goal. After all, when she called at the end of the weird route, she doesn't seem to care that Noel has been traumatized for life. Still, this is counterintuitive. Why would she sacrifice one daughter to save the other? Maybe Des isn't her real objective. With the information we have now, there's just no way to know. So, in conclusion, the knight knows the prophecy and is fully aware of the soul's ability to seal fountains. That's why they dared to create a titan. They knew it could be sealed. But this alliance is fragile, and Kris is starting to rebel. All signs point to a moment where they will fight back against us. Remember, all the effort they put into keeping us away from Noel. Besides, how long were they without the soul while we weren't playing? Each chapter takes place over a single day, so at most, Kris has the night and morning to act on their own. It seems they've used that time well, and a point will come when they'll discard us. And who's going to serve us then if we can't use Kris? Or even Susie, who has her own will? Well, the vessel. From the very beginning, we are asked to create an avatar. We give it a form, tastes, a gift. The question that stands out most is whether we are aware of the possibility of pain and injury. This question specifically refers to us, the player, as if we are the vessel. This makes it clear the vessel will play an important role in the story's future. A future where the soul will need to resort to its last alternative, its own creation. The vessel is a container with no personality, only the preferences we assigned it. This means it will be relatively easy to control to confront Kris, because yes, it's very likely we're heading for a classic protagonist versus protagonist copy showdown. The topic is incredibly interesting and could be its own video. Maybe I'll touch on it in the dedicated soul video. We'll see. Be that as it may, it's a fact that no matter how much the soul makes them suffer, Kris can't get rid of it. It will play a vital role in the future and the end of the game. Even Carol, in that phone call, highlights that without it, nothing will be possible. Don't forget to comment what you think about this theory. See you in the next video.